The massive holographic display flickered to life in the center of the galactic assembly chamber. 1,200 species watched in stunned silence as Admiral Helena Vance stood before them. Her uniform was torn and bloodied. Her left eye was swollen shut. Behind her, through the viewport of her damaged flagship, the burning remains of the collective armada drifted through the void like scattered embers. The Tyrellian High Speaker rose from his crystalline throne. His forearms trembled with barely contained fury as he pointed one long finger at the human admiral. He demanded to know how she could justify what she had done. The destruction of an entire fleet, the breaking of 17 separate accords, the violation of protected space. Admiral Vance did not flinch. She had been awake for 3 days straight. She had watched 4 of her ships burn with all hands aboard. She had personally held the hand of her first officer as he died from radiation poisoning. She was in no mood for diplomatic games. She told them the truth. The collective had been harvesting populated worlds for biomass. 18 billion sentient beings had been processed in the last solar cycle alone. The Assembly had known about this for decades. They had done nothing because the collective controlled 40% of the rare minerals the galactic economy depended on. The chamber erupted in chaos. Species accused each other of conspiracy. Others demanded evidence. The molluscoid delegation attempted to leave, but found the doors sealed by Assembly security. For 6 hours, the debate raged while Admiral Vance stood motionless at the podium. When the vote finally came, it was not what humanity had expected. By a margin of 712 to 488, the Galactic Assembly formally condemned the actions of the Terran Imperial fleet. They demanded reparations. They demanded the immediate arrest of Admiral Vance. They demanded that humanity submit to external oversight of their military forces. The human ambassador, a gray-haired woman named Catherine Joe, listened to the verdict with a calm expression. When the High Speaker asked if humanity would comply with the Assembly's demands, she smiled politely and said that she would need to consult with Earth before responding. 3 days later, the Terran Imperial fleet jumped into the Valaxis system. This was the heart of collective territory. Their homeworld orbited the pale blue star at the center of the system. 42 warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. At their head was the newly repaired flagship of Admiral Vance, the TI Sun-Conquered. The collective had been preparing for this moment. They had gathered every ship they could find. Nearly 200 vessels formed a defensive sphere around their planet. Their commanders were confident. They outnumbered the humans almost 5 to 1. Their ships were larger and more heavily armed. They had the advantage of fighting in their home system with short supply lines and orbital defense platforms. What they did not understand was that humans had spent the last 3 centuries fighting wars that other species considered impossible to win. The collective saw numbers and firepower. The humans saw opportunity. Admiral Vance gave the order to attack at exactly 1400 hours, ship time. The Imperial fleet did not advance in a straight line as the collective expected. Instead, they split into 7 attack groups and began weaving through the enemy formation at speeds that pushed their inertial dampeners to the breaking point. The collective commanders were confused. Their battle computers could not predict human movement patterns. Their targeting systems struggled to lock onto ships that seemed to dance between plasma bolts. One by one, their vessels began to fall. Captain Marcus Chun commanded the destroyer TI Relentless. His ship was smaller than most collective frigates. What it lacked in size, it made up for in maneuverability. He piloted his vessel directly into the center of the enemy formation, drawing fire from dozens of ships, while his weapons officer picked off their sensor arrays one by one. When a collective battlecruiser finally managed to land a solid hit on the Relentless, Captain Chun simply rammed his damaged ship into the enemy's engine section. Both vessels were destroyed. The explosion took out 3 nearby frigates as well. Chun had ordered his crew to the escape pods 30 seconds before impact. 72 of his 80 crew members survived. The battle lasted for 16 hours. By the end, the collective fleet had been reduced to scattered debris. Human losses were significant but manageable. 11 ships destroyed, 23 damaged. Nearly 2,000 personnel killed or wounded. But the path to the collective homeworld was now clear. Admiral Vance could have ordered the bombardment immediately. Her weapons could have reduced the surface of the planet to glass within hours. Instead, she opened a communication channel to the collective leadership. She gave them a choice. They could surrender unconditionally and face trial for their crimes against sentient life. Or they could watch their civilization burn. She gave them 24 hours to decide. The Galactic Assembly was in chaos during those 24 hours. Emergency sessions were called and dismissed. Delegations made threats they could not back up. Several species quietly reached out to the human government, expressing support for the action while publicly condemning it. The molluscoid ambassador, a creature of great age and wisdom, privately asked Catherine Joe why humanity was doing this. They had everything to lose and nothing to gain. The collective's mineral wealth would be worthless if their infrastructure was destroyed. The Assembly would never trust humanity again. Ambassador Joe's response was simple. She said that some things mattered more than profit. Some things mattered more than political convenience. When you had the power to stop evil and chose not to use it, you became complicit in that evil. Humanity had learned this lesson the hard way throughout their history. They would not forget it now. The 24 hours passed. The collective leadership chose defiance. They broadcast a message to the entire galaxy, calling for other species to rise up against human aggression. They invoked ancient treaties and called in debts owed by a dozen different civilizations. No one came to help them. Admiral Vance did not order the bombardment. Instead, she ordered a ground invasion. 300,000 human marines landed on the collective homeworld in the largest amphibious assault in galactic history. The fighting was brutal and close quarters. The collective's ground forces were fanatical in their defense. But humans had a gift for this kind of warfare. They fought in the mud and the rubble. They cleared buildings one room at a time. They adapted to every tactic the collective threw at them. When the enemy used chemical weapons, the humans kept fighting in sealed suits. When the enemy flooded the tunnels, the humans learned to swim in combat gear. Sergeant Maria Santos became famous for holding a strategic bridge for 18 hours with only 12 soldiers under her command. They faced wave after wave of collective assault troops. By the end, only 4 of them were still standing. Santos herself had taken 3 wounds. She refused evacuation until the bridge was secure. The war crimes discovered during the invasion were worse than anyone had imagined. The processing facilities where billions of sentients had been converted into biological slurry. The breeding camps where captive species were forced to reproduce to maintain the supply. The laboratories where scientists experimented on living beings to improve the efficiency of the harvest. Human soldiers who had seen the worst of their own species. History found themselves unprepared for what they witnessed. Psychological casualties mounted, but they kept fighting. They kept pushing forward. They kept liberating the camps and documenting the evidence. 3 months after the invasion began, the last collective stronghold fell. Their leadership was captured alive, as Admiral Vance had ordered. They would face trial. They would face justice. The galaxy would see what they had done and would never be able to pretend ignorance again. The Galactic Assembly met again 2 weeks later. The evidence from the invasion had been broadcast to every corner of civilized space. Species that had traded with the collective for centuries were forced to confront the source of their prosperity. The political landscape shifted overnight. The condemnation of humanity was quietly rescinded. New resolutions were passed, establishing universal rights for all sentient beings. The former collective territories were placed under international administration, with significant human presence to ensure compliance. Admiral Vance was called before the Assembly one final time. The same High Speaker who had demanded her arrest now presented her with the Medal of Galactic Merit. He said that the Assembly had been wrong. They had allowed commerce to blind them to atrocity. They had failed in their most basic responsibility. Admiral Vance accepted the medal with grace. But her words were not gentle. She told him that she had not done this for recognition or reward. She had done it because it was right. Because someone had to. Because when the powerful turned away from injustice, it fell to those with conscience to act. She told them that humanity would always be watching. They would not allow another collective to rise. They would not allow the galaxy to return to comfortable ignorance. If the Assembly ever again chose profit over principle, if they ever again turned a blind eye to suffering, humanity would be there to remind them of their duties. The chamber was silent as she walked out. Some species felt shame. Others felt fear. A few felt hope. Ambassador Joe remained behind to handle the diplomatic details. Treaties were renegotiated. Trade agreements were restructured. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and humanity was now at its center. In the years that followed, the phrase human intervention took on a new meaning in galactic politics. It was both a threat and a promise. Species that abused their power learned to fear it. Species that suffered under oppression learned to hope for it. Admiral Vance retired from active service 5 years after the war. She spent her remaining years writing her memoirs and advising young officers. When she died at the age of 92, her funeral was attended by representatives from over 300 species. The inscription on her tomb was simple. It said that she did what was necessary. This was the highest compliment humanity could pay to its heroes. Not that they were perfect, not that they were gentle, but that when the moment came, they did not hesitate. The Galactic Assembly still meets in its great chamber. The crystalline thrones are still occupied by 1,200 species, but there is a new addition to the hall. A holographic display permanently shows the faces of those who died in the collective's camps. 18 billion souls remembered forever. And beside the display stands a statue of a human soldier in battle gear. The plaque beneath it reads that when the galaxy looked away, humanity looked closer. When the galaxy stayed silent, humanity spoke. When the galaxy chose comfort, humanity chose justice. This is why the other species both fear and respect the humans. Not because of their military power, though that is considerable. Not because of their economic influence, though that grows every year. But because humans seem to carry a fire within them that refuses to be extinguished. A conviction that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. The Assembly condemned their actions. The Imperial fleet continued them. And the galaxy was forever changed because humanity refused to accept that wrong was simply the way things were.